Hello, this video is going to be about applique. What is applique? Applique is when you apply another fabric to a base fabric and you create different kinds of patterns and looks by doing this. It's a great technique to fill in large areas rather than using a fill in EmbroideryWare, which would take a lot of thread. By using applique, you're able to fill in these large areas, and you can fill them in with really neat fabrics, and you can get really neat effects. Also, another thing that's nice about applique is it's a relatively soft application. When you fill using fills, you get a lot of threads and you get very stiff embroidery. But with applique, it's basically fabric, so it's still very flexible and nice. So in EmbroideryWare, we have automated applique type functions to make this job easier. So in applique, there's 4 different types of stitches that are typically used. The first one is a placement line. I'm going to go ahead and draw a circle here and show you in embroidery what these different types are. So over here we have a placement line. If you look at the pop-up, it says placement line. And what a placement line is used for is it basically is what you stitch onto the base fabric to know where you're going to position the next fabric. And it's generally a good idea to have a placement line. You put the placement line down and you can see where to put your fabric square if you have one of those, or if you pre-cut your fabric, you know how to place it exactly. Now, what is a placement line? A placement line, now again, embroidery, these are just shortcuts, but basically by pressing the placement line shortcut, you end up making a single stitch. We don't really need a lot of stitches for placement line, we're just using it as a visual aid. So it defaults to a single stitch. The next step that you have, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. The next step that we have is what is called a cut line. Now, so what a cut line is you basically, after you have the placement line, you place the fabric on, and the cut line will then stitch on top of the placement line. And in the case of EmbroideryWare, we're going to switch this to cut line, where you see this cut line with little scissors in it. And you'll see that it's a double type. So it basically stitches once around and once back. And the reason it's a double is that generally you want to tack the fabric down pretty good. Because when you start cutting it, if it's a single, it might come out in parts and just won't be what you want. So the cut line is next. And so after you've done the cut line, then you take the object out of the hoop, not out of the hoop, you take the hoop out of the machine, and you cut it with an applique scissors. And there's different types. And you cut along this line as close as you can get. Okay. After you've done that, then I'm going to duplicate again. And then the next step is what's called a tack down. So a tack down is a coarse running satin stitch. It doesn't have to be really dense, because what you're doing is you're tacking down the fabric edges that you cut with the cut when you cut after cutting the fabric away. Now, it's important that you cut as close to the cut line as you can so that this tack down will be able to grab most of the edge of the fabric. You'll have maybe some errant things sticking out, and you can just use your applique scissors and cut close to those. Then the next step, I'm going to duplicate this again, is the top stitches. And the top stitches are just the normal satin, the normal density, a little wider than the cut line, that actually covers everything up. Now, in EmbroideryWare, all these commands are basically shortcuts to actually creating the right settings for each of these things. You could do this manually just by copying the circle and setting the settings down here to the applique step, a placement line, cut line, or tack down, and then you could set the various satins and things like you want. But these are all basically defaulted to some values. Okay. Now, after you've done that, basically you have an applique design. So why this is all the same color, and it doesn't have to be. If you change the colors, like for example, if you change the color here to some of these 3 last colors are applique colors. So we have applique material, which is basically a placement line, and also, I believe, it's a tack or cut line 2. And then we have applique position. I'm sorry, I got this wrong. Applique position is your actual placement line, and then applique material, I believe, is your cut line. You'll just have to see if you have a brother machine, these are set colors, and then the top stitches would be this last one, which is applique. And your machine will stop with a little icon indicating that's what you want to do. Okay, so you could set those colors to do that. I generally don't do that. I don't have an Apple machine. I don't have a brother machine anymore, so I just set them to the color that I want for the applique. So let's say we just chose red. Okay, so now I have red as my applique. Now you see these are all the same color, but because they have different applique steps, they will actually be, I gotta change this back to applique placement line. They will be set to stop your machine so you can do each of the steps. Okay, so that's applique basics. Now, if I just wanted to not do each of those individually, I could just do it all at once. So if I chose this button where it says basically duplicate and make applique, it will do all 4 steps for you, where I'll put all 4, the placement line, cut line, tack down, and the top stitches all for you. Okay. So those are the applique things. So let's actually have a practical example to show you how you would do a actual applique design and what kind of steps you would have to consider. So what we're going to do is there is this insert image here, and typically in embroidery what we do is we have a picture that we want to do our embroidery with. So I'm going to do, I did a simple design just as an example before, and this one is pretty small. I'm going to make this picture bigger by choosing it, and then I'm going to choose this quick edit button. The quick edit button I haven't talked about before, but it allows you to basically stretch the designs to be as large as you want. So we're going to make it this large. So in the quick edit button we have, you see the arrows going this way, we can stretch. If we use the quick edit button outside here, it stretches by the center. Also, when you have an image, you can change the opaqueness down to something smaller so you can see what you're doing. And we have this stretch button, which just stretches about the corners. We have a rotation. We have a stretch just vertically. Now, pictures don't actually change, so that doesn't work for that. But anyway, so we have an image. I changed the opacity to a lighter color so I can see what I'm drawing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the ears separate fabrics, and then the face will be its own fabric, and then the eyes will be its own fabric, and the smiley face will just be just a plain old stitch, as an example. So what we're going to do is first we're going to go ahead and draw the ears just using the circle tool. And I'm going to start the circle inside the applique because later I'm going to cut parts of the ears away, and that makes it easy. So we're just going to go ahead and start the circle here. Now you don't see the start and end points. Under the show hide menu, I'll just turn the stitch start and stop up. You'll see that basically this is where the start and stop of those two things are. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the circle for this one probably somewhere like there. Okay. And I'll show you why I'm doing this later. Okay, so now we have the face and the two ears done, and then we'll just do the eyes. And we'll do the smiley face. Now, if you don't know what I'm doing with all these graphic tools, watch the other videos on lines and curves. Um, Everything in EmbroideryWare is based off of these lines and curves, so it's really important that you understand how to draw them, cut them, join them, things like that. Okay, we'll be going through some of those steps here in the applique design, and so that will be evident. Okay, so we're not going to do any applique steps yet, because what we want to do is we want to start modifying some of these items. So basically, I don't want to applique this full circle here. I want to just applique the ear in each case. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to cut some of these lines. So to cut some of these lines, first of all, I have to have it selected. And you can select by using this button and clicking on the graphic, and you'll see that the tools become available. You can also select them here in this select checkbox here. And like, everything is the same color, and so it's possible that you might get confused on what is what. So I just can type in under comments, right ear. And then I can type in the comments for the other one. This is the face, I believe. Yes, so this will be the face. And then this one's the left ear. Okay, so now I kind of can keep track of what these are, and these are the eyes. This is the left eye, I believe. And this is the right eye. Okay. So we'll start with actually, we're going to go ahead and play around with the right ear here. So we're going to turn it on so we can edit it. And then what we want to do is we want to put a point here and a point here, or we want to cut the ear here and here. So we can do that by actually using this tool where it says split curves at new point once. So we click that, and we actually click the point we want. And you notice that another curve is created. And you see that it's called right ear also. What we want to do is we want to get rid of that. So we're going to turn off the main body of the right ear. And just this little segment we don't care about, we're just going to delete it. And then we're going to repeat this by turning the ear back on and then choosing this split curves at new point once. And we're going to click here and separate that. Now at this point, we're going to turn off the right ear. And there we go. So now we have just the ear itself. Now you're probably wondering, it's like, okay, if I'm going to go ahead and draw this ear, applique this ear, the placement line is going to go this far, and then it's going to stop, and I'm not going to be able to see the rest of it. So the way to address that is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a segment here that matches. Now, there's many different ways to do this. You could just simply do inside so that when we do the actual face part of it, we don't get a lot of bulkiness. If we actually put it along here, that just might not be what we want. We're not going to actually do top stitches all the way along here. We're just going to do basically tack down. We're going to do the cut line and the placement line, and you can decide whether you want to tack it down or not. It's not going to matter because it's going to be covered up by the other one. So it might be desirable just to do cut line. So we're going to do that, just cut line. But what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and we're going to click here so that the new graphic will be after this. Wherever you click, it remembers that, so the new graphic will be after that. If you want to put the new graphic before the smiley face image, you can click the top. But we're just going to go ahead and draw a curve from here to here. And we're going to make that curve nice. We'll just call this right ear 2 also. So we're going to make this fit here. Okay. If some of you have different applique techniques, I'm not an expert at doing this a lot, so this technique might not be exactly what you want to do. Maybe we want to push this in a little bit further here. We could do that, make sure that we don't lose anything. So we'll do that. And then also we'll make this longer. I'm sorry, I gotta turn that off. We'll make these longer to go inside. So everything is kind of contained. Again, just like anything else in embroidery, you have to practice around and see what ends up working for you. I'm going to just put these applique things in here like this. So there we go. And then make a few adjustments, and then we're going to do that. Okay. All right. I'm not going to do the other ear right now. It's basically the same technique. All right. So now we got the ear cut away, and we are finished with that. And then basically the face is going to be just a complete applique anyway. So let's just change the colors of the ears so that we recognize them as something else. So I'm just going to do, let's say, brown. Okay, brown doesn't show up that great. How about green? Okay, we're going to do green. All right, so we have the green ears. Now, what do we do for applique? So we're going to go ahead and, just like we did before, we're going to say right ear, and we're going to do a placement line. So now this is a placement line. And then we're going to copy this, and we're going to do cut line. So instead of actually copying, we're just going to press this where it says duplicate and make cut line, which it will do. So now we got 2 more. And we have to kind of find what we have here because I'm a little confused on what I just did. Okay, so this is placement line. This one is placement line. This one is cutting line. So we're going to put the cutting line below this. So we'll move that cutting line below the 2 placement lines. So we have the placement line, placement line, placement line, and then we have the cut line. And then we're going to basically do the same thing for this. We're going to duplicate and make cut line. Okay, so now we have another cut line. I'm sorry, that's not there, it's there. Here's the cut line. All right, we're going to move that cut line down in the stitch order to after this one. Now let's turn everything off so we can kind of see what we're doing here. So this one is going to stitch from here to here, and then it's going to try and stitch over there. If we turn the jump stitches on, you'll see that, oops, it's not what we want. So what we want to do with this one is we want to have it start there. So to make it start there, you can basically change the point order, which is basically as if you drew it the opposite way. So you click that and you click the point order. You can see now that this one goes from here to there and then comes around. Now, you're probably asking the question, okay, these are two objects. It's kind of inconvenient to have two objects on the screen. So let's just combine them by doing join objects once, and we'll just click these two items, and now it's one graphic. And so it's kind of more clear what this is doing. This is placement right ear. Okay. And you'll notice that when we click down here and look at the properties, indeed, it's a placement line. So then the next ones, we can do the same sort of thing where we can combine these two, and we can make this, and we can call this, I'm sorry, I didn't do that right. Got to select them, I suppose. We're going to click these two and make that the cut line, which this is already a cut line because we define that as cut line. So cut line right here. All right, so when we actually stitch this out, it'll stitch around like this, stop, we'll place our fabric over it, we'll get the cut line, and we'll place the fabric over it, and we'll cut as close to these lines as we can. Now that this is done, I kind of goofed up a little bit here because this guy I want to use for the tack down, and I don't have the original object anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. I'll show you what we're going to do here. Mistakes sometimes help show you what to do. We're going to choose this object, and we're going to basically, again, we're going to cut it at this point. And then we're going to get rid of this little segment because we don't need that for the actual final applique. Because remember, when the face comes on, it's going to cover up all this. So all we really need to do is tack down these edges. We can leave this kind of rough inside because it's going to be covered up by the next fabric. You can tack it down if you want. It might be kind of bulky underneath. It's really up to you. All right, so now that we have this circle, we can go ahead and turn this into a cutting line. No, I'm sorry, not a cutting line. We'll turn it into a top stitch, a tack down, and then we'll copy this again, and we'll make this, and we'll move it up in the stitch order. We'll make this the top stitches. So now we've completed the ear. Now you notice it kind of looks funny. You're like, oh, well, it's not a complete applique all the way around. Well, we don't really want to put the applique in this area. We're going to put the fabric in here. This is going to be completely filled in. And then when we actually do the face is going to cover over that. Okay? So that's how that's going to work. Okay, we've turned everything back on by choosing the hide up here, which if you click here on the top, it will hide or show all, or you can individually click these check boxes to show. Now, we can go through all these steps to do the left ear, but basically this is entirely symmetrical. So to save ourselves time, we can select everything for the previous ear. We're going to choose to click this so that we have defined our insert point. So everything should, in theory, insert after here. And then we're going to go under the curves menu, and we're going to say mirror in X dynamically. So what that does is it copies all the objects, mirrors them, and this little line that's near the cursor here shows you what it's mirroring about. So we're just going to go ahead and move it until we're satisfied with what we have. We're going to click, and it's going to basically copy all the items that we had before. Now you notice that they are kind of grouped funny here. So before we do anything else, we can reorder them by pressing the button here, and they'll group together. And you'll see that we have the place right ear, cut line, tack down, and top stitches. So we're done with this. We'll just change this for the left ear, just so that we know what everything is. Sometimes using the comments really helps sort things through. So now we have all the steps we need for the actual embroidery. Now you notice we went a little far here because one of the right ear embroidery objects are out of order, so we're just going to move that up in the list till we get it to where we want it. All right, so we have it there. So this is cut line. No, this is tack down, tack. Right. Top right. Tack left, and then top left. All right, so we'll stitch out in this order, and we no longer need this graphic because that was just the base graphic that no longer is used because we just mirrored things. Now, you might say, Jim, am I going to do these steps separately where I'm going to cut the fabric twice? And my recommendation is generally it's a good idea to do the embroidery, the applique together. Sometimes you get lucky, but sometimes the fabric moves and then you don't end up getting everything lined up. But if you wanted to kind of get all these grouped together, you could basically take the right ear and you could move the place left ear up to the top to be right after the place right ear. And then these would stitch together. Because these are the same stitch types, they're both placement lines, the machine won't stop. And so you could just place your two fabrics, and then you could do the cut lines and the tack lines and then the top lines all together, and you might get lucky. But my recommendation is generally that doesn't always work out. If there's a big design, you might have some placement issues. This is, again, you have to play around with your embroidery and make sure it does what you want. So now we have basically, these will both be appliqued, and then the next step is we just take the face. And because a face is a simple thing, we can just go ahead and press the duplicate and make applique button and just have 4 items in a row. Because we won't need to have, it just will work. And so then the next steps are the eyes left and right, and then the smiley face, which disappeared somewhere. Oh, we maybe deleted it by accident. We'll just redraw it. So then you put the smiley face. Now, the little eyes are a little small for doing applique. So what I would recommend for those is you would do a fill. So basically you would have sort of mixed embroidery types in your applique. You already have the smile that actually is just running stitches. This button here moves it completely to the bottom. That's a quick one just to get it to the bottom. Another way to move things, which hasn't been discussed, is when you click this, you'll see there's an ID here. If you just type in the number, it'll move there as well. We don't really want to put it there, so we'll put it back at 16. The eyes should probably be turned into fills, but essentially you're done with your embroidery. So basically it would stitch out like this. If we run the movie, you'll see that it's going to do the 2 things, and then the tack down, and then the top stitches. Now you notice that there's jump stitches here. You might want to just reverse the top stitches so it goes the other way, so you don't have a lot of jump stitches to cut. So let me show you how that's done. We described it before. So basically what we do here is if we turn off all these, one thing that is neat about EmbroideryWare is we have a starting and stopping indicators. So you can see these little crosses. They both start and stop at the same place. And then we do this, and then you notice the starting point for the tack down is there. Now you're going to be taking this off the machine and cutting anyway, so it really doesn't matter. So, but you know, just for expedience sake, we'll just change the direction of that. So we'll click this and change the direction. You can see that the jump stitch disappears because basically we've moved the start point to here. And now the end point's here. And then basically when we turn this guy on, we've already changed this one, so it automatically just goes back this way, and then the endpoint's that way. So this is pretty much done. You can see that it actually works pretty neat. And so you can practice with this. You know, your layering techniques, where fabric you put down first and how you do this particular line is really something that you'll have to discover what works and doesn't work for you. I found that if you put too much here, you kind of, it ends up propagating through the top fabric and you'll see it potentially. But so this is how you do applique.